What is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is a distributed open source technology that helps us in scheduling and executing application containers within and across clusters. Kubernetes consists of two types of resources, master and node. Master coordinates all the activities in the cluster. For example, scheduling applications, maintaining application state, scaling applications, and rolling out updates. Node is an instance of an OS that serves as a worker machine in a Kubernetes cluster. It has two components, kubelet, agent for managing and communicating with the master, and the tools for containing, running the container applications. What is the role of load balance in Kubernetes? Load balancing is a way to distribute the incoming traffic into multiple backend servers, which is useful to ensure the application available to the user. Incoming traffic, load balancer, services pods. So incoming traffic lands to a single IP address on the load balancer, which is a way to expose your service to the outside world, that is internet, to the outside the internet, which routes the incoming traffic to a particular pod via service using an algorithm known as round robin. Even if any pod goes down, load balancers are notified so that the traffic is not routed to the particular unavailable node. Thus, load balancer in Kubernetes are responsible for distributing a set of tasks, that is incoming traffic, to the pods. What is init container and when it can be used? Init containers will set the stage for you before running the actual pod. It waits for some time before starting the app container with a command like sleep60. It clone a Git repository into your volume. What is Kubernetes load balancing? Load balancing is one of the most common and standard ways of exposing the services. There are two types of load balancing in Kubernetes. They are internal load balancer and external load balancer. This type of balancer automatically balances Internal load balancer. This type of balancer automatically balances loads and allocate the pods with the required incoming load. External load balancer. This type of balancer direct the traffic from external loads to backend pods. kubectl. kubectl is a tool for controlling Kubernetes cluster. In fact, CTL stands for control. It is a command line interface that allows you to pass commands to the cluster and manage the Kubernetes component. What is the role of clusters in Kubernetes? Kubernetes allows you to enforce required state management by feeding cluster services of a specific configuration. Then these cluster services run that configuration in the infrastructure. So the following steps are involved in the process. The deployment file contains all the configurations that is to be fed to the cluster services. The deployment file is fed into the API. Now the cluster services schedule the pods in the environment. Cluster services also ensure that the right number of pods are running, so that the cluster services is essentially made up of an API, worker node, and the kubelet process of the node. How can you run Kubernetes locally? We can run Kubernetes locally using the Minikube tool. So it runs a single node cluster in a virtual inside a VM on your laptop. So it provides an efficient way for users who are just getting started and want to try out Kubernetes. What is Heapster? Heapster is a performance monitoring and metric collection tool supported natively on the Kubernetes cluster. It runs like any other pod in the cluster, discovering all the nodes and querying information from Kubernetes nodes. This container management tool works via on-machine agent. What is an etcd in Kubernetes? etcd is a store for configuration, state, and metadata of the Kubernetes cluster. It is written in the Go programming language and represents the cluster state at a given point in time. This data store serves as the backbone of the distributed systems. What are namespaces in Kubernetes? Namespace in Kubernetes is used to divide the resources in the cluster among multiple users. This is particularly helpful in environments where there are multiple users scattered over a vast area geographically. What is a node in a Kubernetes? Node is the smallest unit in the computing system. It is a single machine in a cluster, formally referred to as minion. Since it is a worker unit that runs the pods, it can be either a physical or machine or a VM, and is controlled by the master components in the Kubernetes system. What are the two main components of Kubernetes architecture? The two main components are master node and the worker node. Master node consists of API server, scheduler, controller, manager, and etcd components. The worker node has the services such as container runtime and kubeproxy that runs on each node. What is the role of pod in a Kubernetes? A role in Kubernetes is responsible for holding individual containers. Each pod can hold various containers depending on the configuration and requirements. The containers held within a single pod share the same resources and the same local network, which makes it easier for them to communicate. What is a cluster data in Kubernetes? The main storage component in the Kubernetes system is etcd. This is where the cluster data is being stored. What is the difference between pod and a job in Kubernetes? The difference lies in their individual functions. The function of a pod is to ensure that a container is running. The function of a job is to ensure that the pods run the completion of the job. What is kubelet? A kubelet is considered as the lowest level component in the Kubernetes system. Its function is to control a set of pods and ensure that all the containers in a given pod are running throughout its life cycle.